We are live. This is Beyond the Booth Live alongside Gary, Keith, and Ron. I'm Steve. And, I just want to bring everybody behind the curtain a little bit. If you've been watching week in, week out, you kind of have a feel for this. But I'm kind of getting the sense, Keith, that you're just doing it just for dramatic purposes now, where 10 seconds, we start the countdown and we're not sure if you're going to be there. And then you pop on right before.
Just because you are not going to be able to intermingle with fans once we start working, I'm keeping you on your toes. That's my plan.
What I like about Keith's situation is that every week we get a little different glimpse. For a while he was in Florida and we had the same shot of the bookcase and the bicycle and the cat. Now every week we're getting a different look. I think that's very refreshing.
Yeah, I feel in a way like I'm casing his joint.
That's a concern.
I hope you have proper security.
I have proper insurance.
Well, like we do every week, we want to hear from you guys. We want to take as many fan questions as possible. So if you're watching this right now on Facebook, please send in those questions and we will get to them a little bit later on in the show. But guys, let's just start with this. Major League Baseball right now, the camps are opening up. Intake started yesterday on Wednesday. The Mets will begin their open spring training to the media on Friday. Overall impressions, Gary, of where we are right now, again, versus where we were a week ago at this time.
Well, the rubber's meeting the road now, right? We're 3 weeks out from what we hope will be the start of the season. Over the last couple of days, every team has been doing the so-called intake, which means testing every player and coach and everybody else who's going to be part of this, the bubble inside the stadium. And the results should come back in time for workouts to begin tomorrow. Now, we got word from Major League Baseball that we are not going to get specific notification about players who are testing positive. However, today, for instance, the Phillies placed 4 players on their injured list without saying what was wrong with them. So you have to assume that at least those 4 players have tested positive, and we're going to get that. And then the question becomes, in this environment where the coronavirus is exploding, not in New York, but virtually everywhere else in the country, 50,000 cases yesterday, 10,000 in Florida today. You just wonder, can baseball keep everybody involved away from the virus sufficient to be able to get to the start of the season and then hopefully get through the season? It is very much an open question. I saw a lot of comments from players. There was an interesting article in The Athletic about the Minnesota Twins, Trevor May especially expressing a lot of concern about just waiting for bad stuff to happen. And I'm sure in the case of a lot of players, that's where they are right now, because they watch the news, they know what's going on, and it's going to be fascinating over the next days and weeks to see whether we can make it successfully to the start of the season.
It's probably one of the reasons we don't have the schedule yet is that, after this weekend, Saturday or Sunday, maybe they'll wait till Monday. But I think it's got to be a reevaluation of the start of this season. Gary mentioned the Philadelphia Phillies. There's going to be a lot of teams out there that are going to have positive results. I think Major League Baseball is going to have to look at that. And that's when the tough, difficult decision is going to have to be made, whether it's worth it and take a shot and try to play the season or not.
I'm in the same camp here. Everything's so up in the air right now. You just don't know. I mean, I've had a friend out here in Sag Harbor, who's a very dear friend of theirs. The wife tested positive. She went back, and 4 days later, after the result, went back and got another test, and she came up negative. Well, now she's going, okay, what the heck? And so she took another test, and she came out negative. So, it's just, who knows?
Well, the other thing, Ronnie, about the schedule is, the commissioner has the right to move games to neutral sites. So,
That's
for
right.
instance, with the spikes in Florida and Arizona and in Southern California right now, you have to wonder, can the Marlins and the Rays and the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers and the Padres and the Angels, can they all play their games in home stadiums, or are they going to have to be moved to places that have lower incidence right now? All of that is up in the air as well, and that creates another logistical nightmare in terms of trying to create the proper protocols. I think Major League Baseball did a great job with the protocols that they put out for keeping everybody safe in the stadium. But as we all know, once you leave the stadium and you're out in the public at large, whether that's your family who is, socializing or being with other people, or whether it's just the public at large, there's a chance of getting the virus and bringing it back into the baseball environment. So I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do, and I don't know what the thresholds are for making those decisions in terms of the individual localities and whether they are viable to be able to play in a relatively safe manner, or within teams, how many people would have to test positive to shut down a team or shut down a league. None of that has been articulated, but you have to think that somewhere in the back of their minds, they have some parameters that they're looking at for making those decisions.
Gary, you touched on something interesting too at the beginning of your first answer with Trevor May, and talking about how there are certainly players that still have some trepidation even as they report. And I think that that's something that, maybe hasn't been talked about enough. It's kind of been this black and white thing. Will you opt into the season? Will you opt out of the season? But I think whether it's Trevor May, or I don't know if you saw the interview with Sean Doolittle yesterday as well, that was on TV, you could sense, listening to Doolittle, who is one of the best spokespeople for the league, I would say, but you could sense that he was there, but he wasn't sure that he was fully going to opt in. He's kind of dipping his toe in the water and going to see how things play out. So, I also think that's another layer of everybody's reporting now, but are players going to feel uncomfortable after being in that setting for a day, 2 days, a week? And are you going to start to see some more guys maybe fall off? There's just, as Keith said, there's just so much in the air at this point.
Well, in Doolittle's case, his wife is high risk. She has
Right.
lung issues that certainly concern him. We've already seen several players opt out: Ryan Zimmerman, Joe Ross, Joe Ross's brother Tyson. The Ross brothers, their father's a doctor, their mother's a nurse, so they have a pretty good sense of things. Mike Leake as well. Ian Desmond. Yeah. So there have been some players to opt out already, and there may be a few more, but I agree with you, Steve. I'll be interested to hear Ronnie and Keith's take on it from a player's perspective. There are a lot of guys who absolutely have to be sitting on the fence right now as they report to camp.
I just feel, what's going to happen if 2 or 3 players are positive, and what is the other players on the team who are sharing the locker room and working out together, what is their reaction going to be? I think there might be some guys that are going to say, hey, I'm out of here. I've got a wife and kids. I mean, it just remains to be seen. It's just so much just hanging in the balance right here.
Yeah, I think Keith's right. I think, there's such a gung-ho attitude to get back to play the sport that you love and to get back on the field and see the guys. But Keith's right. As soon as a couple guys drop, then it's going to be, what am I doing here? You want the season to start. You want to do everything to try to get some games in and get to the postseason, but at what cost? And when it doesn't make any sense, it's time to pack your bags.
And, Luis Rojas did a Zoom call with the media today, and he emphasized, as Brody Van Wagenen did earlier this week, about how much education and how much communication they're going to do with the players and how strict they're going to be about the protocols. But think about how players act in normal circumstances and how much they're going to have to change. The talk has been about not spitting, but I'm thinking about, guys sitting next to each other in the clubhouse. They're not going to be able to do that. Guys congratulating each other after a home run or a nice play, whispering to each other behind their gloves in the field. They're not going to be able to do any of those things. And I would imagine as a player, those things that you do without even thinking, that are part of your daily life and part of the game itself, that you're going to have to think about all the time, have got to put a crimp in the way you're performing your job.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Ron.
I mean, I was just thinking, I mean, maybe they're going to have to invent a COVID shift to make sure players are away from each other. But no, I saw a picture yesterday, and this is what every player would do. It was a picture of one of the teams, and the players were right near the bench outside in the field. And there were at least 8 to 10 of them, and they were all mingling, talking, laughing, having a great time. What you would do on any other year in baseball, except this year. I mean, they should have been in masks. They should have been further apart. But I'm not going to criticize them. I'm just saying that's how hard it is to be able to stay a proper boundary.
And, you know, we've already talked, you mentioned the shift, which I thought was really wonderful, how we up in the booth have to watch the shift. And it's like taking when the game used to be played, it's like taking a breath. You don't even think about it. Now on top of the shifts, the players have had to coordinate, which now they got this. I mean, it's just piling on. And I know if I was playing, Gary, I was a spitter and didn't think twice about it, you know, which is an involuntary act. And now I'm supposed to, oops, here, you know, and I just think it's going to be a takeaway from concentration. I think the player will be able to, once he's on the field, the hitter will be able to focus on that at bat. The pitcher, when he's out there, he'll be able to focus on that inning when he's out there pitching. But all the other stuff, it's just going to be crazy.
You know, I'm going back to what Ronnie just said about, you know, guys congregating like that. And I'm thinking, okay, they came into the ballpark today. They were tested yesterday, but they're not being tested today. And I think every other day is, you know, probably for most of the population is probably enough to, you know, guarantee that you don't have a big spreader incident. But because baseball players, by the nature of their jobs, have to be in close proximity to each other, and, you know, you get something like that where 8 or 10 people are together, the fact that they're not being tested every day, and I know there's the finite amount of resources, and baseball doesn't want to appear greedy in terms of hogging those resources. But boy, it would certainly seem as though the every other day might leave just enough cracks to bring this whole thing down, as opposed to testing them every day.
Yeah, and then we're not even talking about, I mean, I'm confident that probably when they're inside of the bubble, the baseball bubble, they're probably in good shape. But now you're really relying on everyone to do the proper moral due diligence when they leave the ballpark. And that's asking a lot. I think it's asking a lot.
As someone, I can't remember who it was, but someone said on the Brody Van Wagenen call that the honor system hasn't really worked out in this country right now. So it's tough. It's very tough. But let's be optimistic here and say that they're able to pull this off and they put on this season. Certainly it's going to be a different season, as we've discussed a lot. We've seen now the Mets player pool, so not just the 30 guys that will ultimately be on the opening day roster, but teams can carry upwards of 60. When you look at what they've come up with and some of the players that they've signed, Gary, what do you make of what the Mets are trying to do, and how can they make the most of the talent they've accrued?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about what we've seen so far, and they have what, 52, 51?
Yeah, I believe
so
it's
they've still
52.
got some open slots, but some teams on their 60-man player pools have put some of their top prospects, with the idea that because the minor league season won't be played this year, at least that gives their best prospects a chance not to miss an entire year. And even if they're never called up to the big league roster, they can be at the alternate site, working out, playing inter-squad games, whatever that entails. The Mets have chosen not to do that. And Brody was asked about that, and he said, look, we only want people who are going to help us win this year. And you know, again, depending on what the protocols end up being in terms of if players get sick, you know, how many have to get sick before a team shuts down. If you were to get an outbreak on a team where you have 10 or 15 guys shut down, well, then all of a sudden that 50th or 53rd player might become very important for you, maybe even up toward the 60th player. And so it certainly makes sense from that standpoint to have everybody in that 60-man player pool be somebody who can help you at the major league level this year. And so I think it's interesting that Brody went that way, because I think that if you do play and if you are in the real world where there are going to be positive tests, I think that's really the approach you have to take.
I think you're right, Gary. I mean, think of it this way, is that if you're a team that decides to take 10 or 12 of your developing players and make sure they're around so you can watch them throw and hit and this or that, then you're not covered in case the season's going to be played in the sense that Major League Baseball and Rob Manfred say, hey, listen, we're going to have positive tests. Make sure you have enough players because we are going to grind through this thing. If you don't have enough players, then you're really in a bad place. And if they call off the season, those minor league players aren't going to develop anyway, because then it's gone anyway. So I would err myself personally of making sure I'm covered with the real games.
And I've liked the moves, the pickups that they've made. You know, they're veterans, Milky Cabrera, Jared Hughes. They're guys with major league experience. I think that are going to be good substitutes. They're building up their reserve right now, and I think that Brody's done just a really, really good job as far as building up this expanded roster.
Yeah, you can throw Hunter Strickland into that mix too. It certainly deepens an already deep bullpen, and I think in the first weeks of the season, because you only have a 3-week run up to opening day, bullpens are going to be enormously important. I'll go back to what I said last week, though. I think in September, I think starters are going to be pushed harder than ever because nobody has innings limits. But at least early on, bullpen's going to be huge. The other thing about the Mets 60-man pool, one of the interesting names is Janeshwi Fargas, who we saw during spring training, a guy who has not played above AA, but who brings a particular amount of speed to the table. And because of the extra inning rule, that speed is going to be a crucial piece. And you might see every team have a guy on their roster all year, even when the rosters get down to 26, who can be that pinch runner in the 10th inning to maybe help you steal a game.
Yeah.
Hey, Keith, I was just thinking that Haji probably has a lot of lives. No one has more lives than Melky Cabrera. I'll tell you that. You know, Steve, I was just thinking, you're talking about using your roster. I was thinking that one of the things you might be able to do until you get to where Gary was talking about in September, where the starters can really, maybe you have tandem pitchers in the sense that whoever goes, Seth Lugo, who's one of your main weapons, is going to pitch. If you're ahead, he's pitching. If you're tied, he's pitching. If you're 1 run down, so up 1 or down 1, he is pitching in those games. And then, you know, he pitches his 2 innings, whatever. But every third day, let's say, he's ready to go every time to tandem up with whatever starter's going, because you're going to have to push those guys too.
Ronnie, do you think early in the season they'll piggyback guys like with the extra starters that they have, like say a Walker Lockett or David Peterson or Corey Oswald? Do you think they'll have a second starter to piggyback if you assume that your regular starters are only going to go about 4 innings opening day?
Gary, that's what I would do. I would certainly think to myself, I've got to get 7 innings out of my, let's say 2 starters, right? Your starter and your tandem starter. Somehow I got to get 21 outs, because that gets you the back of the bullpen, and you should be able to make it work with Wilson and Betances and Familia and of course Diaz. But that's how I look at it. And sometimes early in the season, you might only get 4 innings from one of your starters, and the guy coming in like an Oswalt or someone else might have to get 9 outs. But that's I think what you're going to see, you know, in the first 3 weeks at least of the season.
You know, what's interesting too, another thing is you got Mother Nature involved too. If there's a lot of, every time, Ronnie, we have a season, either it's a dry season or it's one season where it's wet and it rains. What happens if you're doing these 60 games in 66 days and you've got a bunch of rainouts and then you got backup doubleheaders? My goodness, it's going to be, it is just really something to consider. It's another issue that could come out of everybody's control.
Let me ask you, and I'm not sure I know the answer to this. There have been, you know, different rules set down for this unusual season. Do you think there's a chance they could go to the 7-inning doubleheader rule sometime before opening day? Is there still a chance for that to be? I was surprised that that was not part of the package. There was so much talk about not keeping teams in the ballpark for so many hours, and that 7-inning doubleheader games like they play in the minor leagues might be something they added. They opted not to, but I wonder whether they can change their minds before opening day. Do you guys know that?
I think they can, Gary. I still think they can do that. And if they're listening to Keith on this Facebook Live here, they should do it because honestly, if the weather does affect those games, I think they should have that in just to cover. I think what's going to happen, Keith, because we're getting close to the 35th anniversary of the July 4th game. I think you're going to see some games like that where singles into center field disappear into lakes, and that.
Yes.
We're going to spend a lot of time wherever we're at, us three, waiting, because I think they're going to play the game at some point, no matter what.
On the other hand, Ronnie, what they've done this year is they have made every game that starts and is stopped a suspended game. Yeah. And I think the rationale for that is not to sit around for 4 hours waiting to resume a game. They feel as though they don't want the players to be in the ballpark for that long. So if you have a rain delay that lasts some period of time, or it looks like the forecast is bad, they're going to bang it right there, resume it the next day as a suspended game, and I think that will help in that regard.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question, though. I've been thinking about it, Ronnie, the opposite way, where now if you've got even a bad forecast, instead of having everybody show up to the ballpark, wait around a little bit, it's going to be potentially much more of a proactive get rid of it and not put everybody in those spots.
Oh, I think they're going to make them come to the ballpark and try to play. What you got to really worry about is getaway day, the final game of a series, when there's hardly any off days. And that team has to go play the next day at another city, or the Mets have to go to another city. You can't make that up. You can't just play the next day. And I'm curious how they're going to have the off days in the schedule situated. Usually in a normal season, traditionally, you always had, because of April, you had the off days more than we needed in April and early May because of potential spring rains. Will they have more off days scattered into the last month because of the potential of rainouts? So they would have off days to be able to make up games.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think what also is advantageous, Keith, is that because you're only playing 9 different teams, and because the vast majority of your games are going to be in division, it's easier to make those games up if you have to rain out a getaway day.
Yep.
Steve, you're so innocent. Don't you know by now, baseball, whatever decision they make, it's going to make you feel at most disadvantaged every single day. So come on.
No, you're right. You're right. Sorry, guys. I'll learn one of these days. Listen, before we get to the fan questions, the other really interesting thing about this season, again, if they play it, is that you've got a trade deadline that's a month into the season. And oftentimes it takes certain players a full month to really ramp up and teams to understand what they are, 1 month, maybe more. What type of a challenge is that going to be from a front office perspective to figure out what you need, how realistic you are in terms of you being a contender? All of that has to be made. Those decisions have to be made very, very quickly into a year.
Well, I would make 2 points. One is I don't think there should have been a trading deadline. I think the roster should have been frozen from day one. There's no reason to have a trading deadline, no reason to have trades made once the season starts in a 2-month season. I think that was a big mistake. And it just not only from a baseball standpoint, but also from a personnel standpoint, getting guys to move around in the middle of the season. We're trying to avoid that. So I think that should not have been done. The other thing is that because you're only going to have 60 players available, most of the guys, the prospects who would normally be traded at the trading deadline, will not be available for trade. So I think that will diminish the number of trades that might be made. But I don't know from an evaluation standpoint how unless you get off to a 5-25 start and you're looking to unload, I don't know how anybody makes that decision a month into the season.
I agree. I think that, and particularly in the Mets case, I think they're happy with their personnel. You're going to run with the horses. It's really in the course of a season, you're going to have periods of time where players go in a slump, and you just got to have faith in them that, okay, if Pete Alonso gets off to a slow start or a Jeff McNeil, that they're going to come around. What are you going to do? You're going to bench McNeil because he had a bad first month, hit 230. I just don't think so. It's too important a piece to this ball club. You either sink or swim with your player.
What about from a bullpen perspective, though, Ronnie? Like, totally, if you've got a Pete Alonso slumping or a Jeff McNeil, okay, but I mean, Edwin Diaz got how many months last season? You need to make that evaluation on the back end of your bullpen very, very quickly. I mean, I would think, given what a 9-week season, 1-2 weeks most that you can give a guy who's struggling in the pen?
Oh, it'll be less than that, Steve. It's going to be like pegs on a board. And it might be the top peg to start, but if you have a couple bad outings, you go right down to the bottom and they just move up the pegs. And that's what's going to really happen. You're not going to be able to afford, and I don't want to jump on Edwin Diaz. That was last year. It's not this year. But if he had a similar start to a season this year that he did last year, there's no way they can go to him. It's just not, it's not the right thing to do for the other 26, 28, 30, whatever number of guys that there are. So I think there's going to be playing the hot hand. And we've seen managers do that before, but there's going to be a lot more of that.
I want to go back to something I talked about last week, and that is you have got to, in a 60-game season, keep your best players on the field as much as you possibly can. And I know, again, with the sports science, the days off that they mandated during a 162-game season made some sense. In a 60-game season, I don't think Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil and Ahmed Razar, those guys are never coming off the field, at least if I'm the manager. And Jacob deGrom has got to start every 5 days, no matter what the off-day situation is. You've got to move everybody else around him and make sure you get the maximum number of starts. Hopefully you can get 13 starts in a 66-game season out of deGrom, and that's the best way for you to win. And nobody asked Luis Rojas about those things during his presser today, but I think those are big issues as we go through the next 3 weeks and get ready for the season.
Scientists, stay out of baseball this year. You don't have any sample size, 0.
Well, you know what the physicists say, you can't make that ball break. It's impossible. The ball doesn't break.
By the way, speaking of breaking, did you guys read the story about Jared Hughes and the physicist that he has been following?
To get his sink? Was it about his?
It was about his sinker, and he was trying to figure out why his sinker was less effective last year than the year before. And this guy's theory is that generally we think about 2 things that affect the way the ball moves: gravity and spin. This guy's saying that seam location matters also, and that if the seam is pointed in a particular direction when the ball comes out of your hand, it will move more than if the seam is pointing in a different direction, even if the spin is the same. And this is something that Jared's been working on because his sinker needs to move and didn't move as much last year, or was more inconsistent. He gave up a lot of home runs. I thought that was fascinating. They call it seam wave. And I had never read about this before, and this was fascinating to me.
So when we are talking about spin rate for guys breaking balls, it could be different depending on the seam wave of the breaking ball, right?
Yeah, just the direction
the way it
that
catches the air,
is pointed, coming out of your hand is going to affect the way the ball moves.
I would have never a strike if I pitched now, ever.
So let's talk. We've got some fan questions. Let's keep on with the theme. You mentioned Jared Hughes, but any of these new additions. Tony wanted to know if you could, again, we don't know who's going to be injured, who's going to unfortunately contract the virus, but is there any one guy that was signed this week that you say to yourself, okay, I think this one is going to make a significant impact on this team, or at least has the potential to?
Well, I would go with Hughes because we have seen him be a dominant sinker ball pitcher, and he gives the Mets a look out of their bullpen that they did not have. And I think that, based on, Hunter Strickland has had good seasons, but he profiles like a lot of other pitchers. Hughes is a little different animal. And I think of all the guys that they've signed this week, he'd be the guy that I would flag as being the biggest contributor, at least for right now.
Strickland's just there to pitch to Bryce Harper. By the way.
Well, even though there are no fights allowed this year.
Listen, I'm excited just to see Jared Hughes run into the bullpen, right? I think that's going to be great. I'm going to go with Strickland because, you've been waiting for this young man to go to the next level. He's got all the physical gifts to do that. He hasn't been able to do that. He hasn't been able to find his control and get ahead. All of those simple things that make you a better pitcher. But the physical gifts are through the roof. And who knows? Maybe he catches fire for 60 games. I'd love to see it.
Well, I just think with the DH, it's not going to be a position player that's going to have an impact, too great an impact. I think it's going to be out of the bullpen. I'm not going to speculate. Who knows who's going to be the person that comes forward and excels, but it's going to come out of that pitching staff.
By the way, speaking of DH, I was interested in one of the things Luis Rojas talked about today when he was asked about the DH. Of course, he talked about Cespedes. He mentioned Wilson Rojas, and we had not Wilson Ramos. We had really not talked about as a DH, but it makes perfect sense on the days he doesn't catch to keep his bat in the lineup as the DH, especially if there's a lefty on the mound.
No question. He's a professional hitter. He can hit, and he's a good clutch hitter. He's got to be in that lineup. As much as you said, Gary, your 60-game sprint, you've got to keep these guys in the lineup.
Yeah, and I wonder whether he starts less as a result of that. If Luis has it in his mind to use Wilson Ramos as a DH.
I think a couple of reasons, Gary. I think you're right. I think he will start less because I don't think he can catch every single day. He's just not built that way, and to keep him fresh. And secondly, with certain pitchers that struggle with runners on base, maybe you want Rivera or someone else who has a little more arm.
Noah's not there this year.
Yeah,
Noah's not there. You do wonder, though. I mean,
Jacob struggled last year.
You do wonder, though. Even a guy like Stroman, and we heard no complaints from Stroman, but Stroman's such a low ball, sinker ball, keep that ball down in the zone pitcher. That's where Ramos struggles. I know he's been working a lot on that this year, but it gives the Mets options if they want to put a better defensive catcher back there and keep Ramos's bat in the lineup. I agree with you, Gary. That was, for me, of everything Rojas said, that was the most interesting thing that he said.
But then you got to keep Cespedes in the lineup too. So if he can't go in the outfield, then there you go.
Again, we don't know if he can't go in the outfield. Nobody's really gotten that far. And if you can play him in left field with his defense instead of J.D. Davis or Dom Smith, absolutely. And then, J.D. can DH on a day when Ramos is catching. And, they've got a lot of moving parts. But the bottom line is you got to keep the best bats in the lineup as much as possible. And DHing Ramos certainly allows you to do that.
Gary just hit on something. You got to keep those bats in the lineup. And I also feel we talk a lot about the pitching on this team we have for the last few years. They are going to have to be able to slug. They're made to slug. They have a team that 1 through 9 is going to be able to hit the ball. And remember, they're playing American League East teams. Those teams slug. They don't mess around, in Fenway Park and in Yankee Stadium. So the slugging of that lineup is going to be interesting to watch.
So, Ronnie, that being said, Donald does want to talk a little bit about the pitching. He wants to know how confident you guys are in the consistency of the rotation beyond Jacob deGrom.
Well, that's interesting. We're talking about a lot of pitchers that have had amazing highs, but they've never been able to hit that consistency like deGrom has. Now, I'm not saying to be as good as deGrom, but, put those 8, 10, 12 starts together in a row. They really haven't really seen that in their career. But knowing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel as a starter, right? It might make it a little easier to say to yourself, I'm not saving anything in the tank. I'm going to be, I'm going to push it as far as I can push it. And I think you're going to be surprised. I think the pitchers are going to be far more ready for this season, if we play it, than we think they are. I think they're going to keep it kind of simple. I think the hitters are definitely going to be ready, but not as ready as they would be on July 23rd or 24th in a regular season. So I think the pitchers are going to be more ready than you think.
At least to an interesting question, Ronnie. Do you think, and Keith can weigh in on this too, during this hiatus, do you think it has been easier for the pitchers to stay in a groove because they can throw off a mound or whatever circumstance they've been in, as opposed to a hitter who probably has not faced live pitching in the last 3 months? Does that make sense?
To me, it does. Sorry, Keith. To me, it does. I think that, pitching and catching is you just got to have someone from your local high school or someone in the area, and you can get your work in every single day. A little more difficult for the players unless you're in the Palm Beach area. Brittany Rowley with a great article today about the All-Star camp.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was
Scherzer and Verlander and Kluber and Goldschmidt. I mean, the talent level was good. Robert Gesellman was there for the Mets. Michael Wacha.
That's like the Navy SEALs in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
Can you imagine just stumbling on that game? Like just walking by and stumbling on it?
I just hope there was no outbreak that results from that, because who knows what, distancing rules they were self-policing with. I mean, hopefully everybody was smart, but, it just gives you a little bit of pause. But that's quite an all-star accumulation there.
Right.
Brian wants to know. Sorry, Keith, go ahead.
No, I just feel it's easier for the hitter from my perspective. All I need is BP and get a rhythm. To me, pitching is such an art, and Ronnie, you've got to have your command, and I think there's no substitute. You can pitch on the side and have like a real live, but it's nothing like a game experience where it's the 7th inning and you got runners on second and third, 2 outs, and you're protecting a 1-run lead. Yeah. I think the pitchers are going to be it's a little more difficult for them once the game starts. Players are going to have their rhythm because they're taking batting practice, and they're also getting some live pitching. So I feel the opposite.
Okay, good.
All right, we'll finish up on this question from Brian, because this is Beyond the Booth and he wants to know about the booth. So he asked, for you guys, what will be the biggest challenge calling the games this season?
Oh, I mean, the road games will be a new experience for all of us. We will not be in the ballpark. We will be watching on a monitor, the same screen that the TV viewer is going to be watching. And, in all the years that I've been broadcasting baseball, I have never had that circumstance. So that changes what we can see. I mean, normally when we're in the ballpark, we can see everything in front of us, plus what's on the screen that the viewer is seeing at home. Now we're only going to be able to see what the viewer is able to see. And there are certain things about, in my job anyway, the way you call a game, you can see things contemporaneously that you can't see on television. For instance, when the ball is hit, there's a split second there, whereas a TV viewer, you don't know where it's going or what the trajectory is, as opposed to if you're in the ballpark, you can see if it's a ground ball or a line drive or a fly ball and what direction it's going. You have less of a clue. So it's going to change the rhythm of the way that you call a game. And there will probably be 100 other things that'll be different about it too. And then the home games, of course, there's no crowd, and you're dealing with that and the fact that the players will probably be able to hear our broadcast from the field. So basically everything is going to be new to all of us.
I think it's going to be a little more onus put on the directors who are calling the game, the cameras, because we're going to need them to show us the game as it's happening, so Gary can make the call, the spontaneous call. And it's my understanding also, Gary, you're going to be by yourself in the one booth, and then Ronnie and I are going to be together in another, the visiting booth.
Yeah, I get Dave Freed in my booth.
So
who wins?
What's going to be bizarre is our broadcast is so conversational,
right?
And you're going to be in another room. It's going to be
you're going to be in the booth next door to me. So I'm thinking, those mirrors that you use to see around a corner.
Yeah.
We need to put up one of those mirrors so we can see each other even though we're not in the same booth.
Keith,
Well, I wonder if it's going to be like when you guys called the MLB The Show, and you're not there together, and you've got to kind of
we could see each other. We were in little
you all were on
boxes.
Zoom,
we
so you
could
see each other.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
and Steve, imagine how bad that was. So anyway, Keith, I have just cleared it. You and I aren't even doing it in the other booth. Gary's going to be doing it in our home booth with Dave Freed, and you and I are doing it from the porch of the American Hotel, if that's all right.
Oh,
what's the difference, right?
that's perfect. That's perfect.
So here's my question, Steve. Where in heck are you going to be?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
I think home games, that's basically just going to be my role, is I'm going to hide somewhere in the stadium and have Keith try and find me. That's going to be, when we're bored during one of the games. No, quite frankly, I don't know 100% what the protocol is in the stadiums at home. I know I'm not going to be allowed in the normal camera well, so I can't be anywhere where I would normally be able to see what's going on in the dugout. And then on the road, I'm going to be in the studio. So I don't know. I'll be watching off a monitor like you guys are.
If you need to see into the dugout, you sit in the Big Apple seats in center field with a pair of binoculars.
With the binoculars. That's right. That's right.
And nobody will mind. Just don't bang a trash can.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, it's gonna be a totally different experience for all of us, no doubt about it. We hope we get there, but we will see. Tomorrow, if you're watching this again live on Thursday, tomorrow the Mets open everything up to the media for the first time, so I'll be out at Citi Field. We'll have a live show, BNNY, at 6:00 on SNY. So tune in for that, and we'll see. I mean, this is just going to be a learning process. We're going to see. It's going to be broken down into 3 separate groups, 3 separate workouts to keep everybody socially distanced. It's going to be an interesting day, to say the least, tomorrow.
Steve, will you be wearing a mask on the air?
I don't think I'll be wearing a mask on the air, but I'm not sure. I know in Citi Field, at least in the press box, the mask is mandatory at all times. So if I'm shooting the show from inside Citi Field, I may have to wear a mask.
Do you have a spiffy mask that you can wear on the air? Something,
No, I've got
something cool.
No, I'll be honest with you. I've even thought about that because my wife is very, she digs in on this stuff, and she got one of those N95s, which actually it's suctioned up against your face. So you feel pretty safe in it, but it looks kind of like a duck bill. So
can we hear you through the N95?
Yeah.
We can't, but they've told me that that's actually better. So that's the good thing.
Steve, you're a little too young, but there was a movie with John Travolta, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. I need one of those shows.
Oh, Bubble Boy.
The Bubble Boy.
The Bubble
The
Boy.
Moops.
Sorry,
it says the
Moops. All right, that is going to do it for us. For Gary, Keith, Ron, I'm Steve. Stay safe, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Okay,
See you later.
buddy.